Good morning, and thank you to all of you for being here, especially our very distinguished witnesses. Thank you for taking the time to prepare your testimonies and for your leadership for many, many years. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations will come to order. Today, the subcommittee continues to expose the ever-worsening, pervasive, malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party at the United Nations. The Chinese Communist Party is an unelected, highly deceptive, and unimaginably cruel political entity, a dictatorship that rules by force, torture, and coercion, and stands credibly accused of genocide and a plethora of human rights abuses. The CCP is not a benign rival to the United States or other free nations, but poses an existential threat to its neighbors in the region and a serious military threat to the United States. The CCP does not just seek to dominate the international rules-based order, it seeks to replace it. That's why, for example, I strongly oppose the PRC's ascension into the World Trade Organization with my vote in the House. This is 2 decades ago. And I chaired several hearings, including one in 1999, which I called China Human Rights in the WTO. And in 2011, 10 years in the WTO, has China kept its promises? The record is clear and ominous. The CCP absolutely does not keep its promises to respect the innate dignity of all people, and to this day works to subvert and fundamentally undermine all respect for human rights. Under Xi Jinping, the CCP has mastered the art of subverting the international rules-based order through its involvement at the UN. And I am deeply concerned that the Biden administration is not taking sufficient action to stop it. Let me start by reminding everyone that the United States played the leading role in founding of the United Nations in the aftermath of World War II, and remains by far the largest financial contributor to the UN system. It is true that China's assessed contributions have risen to the second highest rate, 15%, compared to the US rate of 22%, yet China lags far behind the United States in funding to the UN. In 2022, for example, the US contributed, approximately $18 billion to the UN system, more than 8 times the amount that China contributed. Moreover, only about $3 billion of this was assessed contributions. The U.S. paid 90 times more than China in voluntary contributions to the UN in 2022. China's voluntary contributions were only $164 million. And yet, where is the acknowledgement for this extraordinary generosity? Why does the United States so often fail to yield commensurate influence within the UN system? Ambassador Bremberg and Ambassador Curie, I want to thank you especially for your previous service representing the United Nations at the United Nations and for being here today. And Suzanne Nozzle, welcome to you as well. We look forward to hearing your reflections on these matters from your personal experience of the CCP's corrupting influence in the UN system. Even though China's financial contributions to the UN remain comparatively small, the CCP has become adept at manipulating the UN system for its own advantage. The CCP blatantly uses its position on the UN Human Rights Council to shield itself from criticism and to avoid accountability for its horrific human rights abuses. I was appalled when former High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet caved to CCP demands to water down her report on Xinjiang. Instead of rightly declaring these atrocities a genocide, she pulled punches and delayed the release of the report literally until the 11th hour, publishing the document minutes before her term expired. And when the United States proposed a resolution to merely debate the ongoing genocide in Xinjiang, it was voted down at the Human Rights Council because the CCP lobbied effectively against it. In a February hearing of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, which I chaired, Dr. Rana Seo-in-Bodin of the University of Texas at Austin testified that, and I quote, China's actions over the last decade show that the PRC has become intent on using its presence in the UN to alter international human rights norms and rewire the system in ways that will make it easier for states to escape scrutiny of their human rights records, close quote. This includes manipulating the Universal Periodic Review process, which they did very effectively, sadly, where the CCP pressured developing countries and fellow authoritarian regimes to speak in its favor and help obscure its abysmal human rights record. They crowded out comments by other nations by filling up the roster with people who are just paying lip service and kowtowing to China. As I said at the hearing just in February, the truth is that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party constitute a systemic challenge to the international rules-based order and reject the very concept of universal human rights. The obstruction of truth during the latest UPR is just another example of the CCP's long and brutal campaign to silence its critics. As we've heard from previous witnesses, Hillel Noor of UN Watch, for example, staff at the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights were pressured to share names of dissidents, including Uyghurs, who planned to come to the United Human Rights Council. And they did share these names routinely with the CCP, who then used the information to intimidate these human rights activists as well as their families. It is despicable that even when this was exposed by courageous whistleblowers, including Emma Riley, she was punished by the UN for revealing the truth. The CCP also pressures Chinese nationals in UN leadership positions to prioritize party interests over the obligation to the UN Charter. When Wu Hongbu was head of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, he admitted to acting in China's interests at the UN, including throwing Xinjiang human rights supporters out of UN buildings. This abuse of power is not unique. We saw Fang Liu, when she was head of the International Civil Aviation Organization, attempt to cover up a serious data breach that was linked to Chinese state-affiliated hackers. And when Chinese nationals do attempt to carry out leadership duties without doing Xi Jinping's bidding, they are summarily punished, as in the case of Meng Hongwei, the first Chinese head of Interpol, who was detained in 2018 and sentenced to 13 years in jail. The charges against him were allegedly part of an anti-corruption campaign, or more likely a purge of Xi Jinping's political rivals. And his wife has been left with no information whatsoever about his whereabouts. Where is Meng Hongwei now? Will he ever get justice? CCP pressure extends not just to Chinese nationals, but to CCC-preferred candidates from other nations. We have seen the World Health Organization Director General Tedros, who the CCP supported, bend to Xi Jinping's influence, especially when the WHO parroted CCP talking points in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Tragically, this malign influence allowed the CCP to avoid accountability and conceal important information that could have saved lives. Right now, with a pandemic treaty is being negotiated at WHO, and of course the text includes nothing that would hold the CCP accountable for its role in COVID-19 origins. WHO are both important standard-setting bodies, and the CCP has deliberately excluded Taiwan from these and many other international organizations. Even though Taiwan has displayed exemplary public health practices and remains a major air traffic hub, Taiwanese delegations are denied a voice at these venues due to pressure from the CCP. This is an especially important issue to highlight today on the 45th anniversary of the Taiwan's Relations Act becoming United States law. The CCP twists UN Resolution 2758, which allowed the Communist PRC government to become a UN member, to claim that the international community recognizes the PRC sovereignty over Taiwan. This document does not address, however, Taiwan's sovereignty, and should never be used as an excuse to exclude Taiwan from merely participating in international organizations. And the U.S. must do more to support Taiwan's participation. As we all know, there's a very strong bipartisan support for this, but it has not yielded the fruit that we all hope for. The U.S. also must do more to promote American candidates and those of partners and allies in key leadership elections. The State Department has promoted successful campaigns to place U.S. and partner country citizens in some key positions over the past years, sometimes ousting CCP-preferred candidates. For example, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, an American, was successfully elected Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union in 2022. She replaced a PRC national in that important standards-setting body and defeated a Russian CC-backed candidate in the election. The U.S. was also waged a successful effort to support a Singaporean national as head of the World Intellectual Property Organization in 2020, defeating the PRC candidate. But overall, this effort could be more strategically coordinated to ensure that our partners and allies are on board and that we are targeting the most important posts, which could otherwise be manipulated by the CCP. While the CCP malign influence at the UN is getting worse, the UN has a window of opportunity to counter this influence and preserve the rules-based order. But we must act now and be more outspoken about the threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses within the multilateral system. I would like to now yield to my good friend, Dr. Burra, for any opening comments.